Okay, are you ready for another round of genetics? Yeah, I hope so. So this is kind of part two of your genetics unit. Well, you have two units. One is genetics, one is genetics 2. So this time we're going to take a look at some different things. Last time we talked a lot about the basics of genetics, kind of just overall. We talked about dominant versus recessive traits. But today we're going to start off quickly with something known as Punnett squares. And you guys are going to see these over and over again when you get to high school and even on beyond that. Punnett squares are still used. Now this is the most simplified form of a Punnett square where we just are looking at one trait. But actually we can take a Punnett square and look at many different traits and it becomes this huge crazy box and you're very overwhelmed, and we're not going to do that. So yay! But we are going to look at Punnett squares. What these are a visual for showing probability. Okay, now don't go out and get a tattoo of this. I know you really like some genetics. No, just kidding. But nonetheless, this shows all the possible gene combinations from a cross of parents whose genes are known. You have to know those genes, otherwise you can't cross them, right? So here, right here, we're looking at blue versus brown eyes, okay? And good old Carrie is the mom. And Carrie has the genes that we know of as big B and little b, okay? And basically, big B is the dominant brown eye trait. Little b is the recessive blue eye trait, okay? And they have color-coded it just so nicely for us. Now, good old Rusty, her husband, has blue eyes. By the way, Carrie has brown eyes because the big B is dominant, right? Rusty has blue eyes. So he's got little b, little b. Okay, in order to have blue eyes, since it is a recessive trait, you need to have two recessive traits. You have to have both of those recessive. Well, when you do the cross multiplying, which we're going to take a look at an example in your unit, hopefully you've already looked at it, but it's going to be giving you another example, or actually I think an example similar to this, but it shows you kind of the cross multiplying. So you're going to take big B and little b, and that ends up being your first square right here. Then you're going to kind of multiply over here, kind of cross multiply, so to speak, and you have little b, little b. You have big B, little b, and you're always going to start off with the dominant trait. So if you have a dominant trait, it's going to start off with the big B or the big H or whatever you're dealing with. And then the last one is little b, little b. So in here, we see that there's a 50% chance. See how there's two squares? There's 4 squares total, so obviously each of these squares represents 25% chance. Well, you have two little b's, meaning 50% chance, two of those squares mean 50% chance that your child will have blue eyes, a 50% chance that your child will have brown eyes, okay? That's what the Punnett square tells us. Here's now the male-female, okay? So obviously you have a male, and the genotype for that is an XY, and a female is XX, okay? So say the male gives off an X trait, and so obviously so is the female, so you're going to have an XX. And you have a Y here, okay, and an X here, so you're going to have XY, and you're just cross multiplying again, XX and XY. So you see that you have a 50-50% chance of getting a boy or a girl, okay? So that's just basically the Punnett squares. Now let's take a look at your course, because in your course, and let me go back to the page that I would like to show you guys, because I think that there's a great kind of an interactive, sorry, I should have been on this already, but an interactive way to kind of look at this, so to speak, okay? So we're going to look at this. I'm going to bring this over here just a little bit, and that did not work the way I wanted it. Okay, let's bring it right there. Now, I'm going to bring this down. Oh, and this is still not the one I wanted. Okay, here it is, tutorial. So the tutorial, and this is a very quick one, but I'm going to be quiet because you're going to hear this person be speaking about it. And it gives you guys kind of a good example of what it looks like to actually do your own Punnett squares. And we will practice this in class.
In the last lesson, we learned about dominant and recessive genes and how you have a genotype for each trait that could be big A, little a, or little a, for example. We can use the genotypes of two parents to predict which trait the offspring will have. We do this by making a Punnett square.
Alright, so let's look at this last one.
Let's say one parent has brown eyes, which is dominant to blue, and we know that their genotype is big B, little b, so they carry a recessive gene for blue eyes. The other parent has blue eyes. First, we make a box that looks like this. Then, fill in the parent's genotype along the top and bottom like this. above and from the side to show the new possibilities for the offspring. There are 4 squares, but only 2 different combinations. These 2 parents will have offspring that either have the genotype big B little b or little b little b. Big B is not a possibility. There's a 50% chance of either type. And remember, big B little b is brown and little b is blue. So half their children will have blue eyes and half will have brown. Punnett squares show us how it is possible for 2 brown-eyed people to have a child with blue eyes. If they are both carrying a blue-eyed gene, then 25% of their children should have blue eyes.
Okay, so there you have just a little bit of kind of some practice, and we're going to do this together in class. But let's keep going because there's some more things mentioned in your unit. Gene mutations, and I have some good videos for you guys in just a moment, and also when we meet together. But gene mutations are something that happens all the time. Now you can have a very huge gene mutation where when you think of all your chromosomes, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes. If you have a huge chromosomal mutation where you have maybe an extra chromosome or not enough chromosomes, typically those babies won't even survive. That's why a lot of miscarriages occur, is because of a chromosomal gene mutation or mutation. So, but you can also have a small mutation that may or may not cause something that's detrimental. It may just cause a difference in appearance or whatever it might be. But that can be on a single point of a gene. So let's talk about the different gene mutations. You have gene rearrangements. So remember, genes are on the actual chromosomes, okay? So you have an entire gene moves to a different location is what we call a gene rearrangement, where basically it's rearranged, okay? Again, that can cause something that's very harmful, but it can also cause, really more just a basic physical feature or something internally that does not cause, death or any kind of disease, so to speak, okay? But it can. It just depends on the type of gene rearrangement. You also have gene alterations. When the wrong amino acid is placed during protein synthesis. So what genes do is basically they call for certain proteins to be made, because pretty much everything in our bodies is made up of proteins, and when you scale everything down. So basically, if you have this gene alteration and the wrong amino acid is synthesized for this protein, then you can kind of screw up that entire protein, and therefore it will cause other effects in your body, okay? You also have an insertion kind of mutation, where a large part of DNA is inserted into a gene, so kind of like extra, so to speak. Not that that it's in a wrong order, but you might have an extra portion that's inserted into that gene from the DNA. The deletion is of the opposite, where basically a whole segment of that gene is lost, okay? Again, some of those things can cause some major issues, but sometimes it doesn't cause much, kind of we can live life as is. Okay, so again, here's kind of an interesting picture here where basically the father has a mutated gene and becomes a carrier of a disease. The mother's a non-carrier. Okay, so you can pass down these genes, and this is kind of another way to view a Punnett square. But basically, thank goodness, because the mother is not a carrier of that mutated gene. The son and this daughter could be a carrier, but it necessarily wouldn't mean that they have that mutation and they're not affected by it. But if the mother was a carrier and the father was a carrier, maybe they didn't know, they could have a child that has that absolute gene mutation, which could cause for major, health issues. Okay, so I've got a video to show you guys, and it is kind of sad because when you think about it, this is something that just happens and no one knows why. I mean, there could be some reasons why. Sometimes mutations can occur from different environmental factors, but for the most part, they just kind of happen. So let's take a look at this movie, and then we'll come back and discuss a couple more things. Here you go.
When I found out I was BRCA positive, I did not know how to tell people.
Right.
I have a genetic mutation.
Right.
What does that
You could start by saying everyone has genetic mutations. Mine is in a gene we know about. Right? All cancer is genetic. Some of those genetic changes, the first ones, are inherited. We get one copy of every gene from our mother, and one copy of every gene from our father. Your mutation would have come through your mom. mutation is something that has gone wrong with DNA. The genetic code is a code of words, each of 3 letters. My favorite example is the fat cat saw the red dog run out. If you take out the FA of fat, the rest of what you have in that sentence is now nonsense. Meanwhile, a person with this mutation is completely healthy. There is nothing wrong with having one copy of a mutant BRCA1 or BRCA2 because you have the other copy guarding your genome in your breast cells and your ovarian cells. All that it takes is for the remaining normal copy to be lost, for a cell to begin to become a tumor. That's why one is so predisposed to the illness, because the first mutation is already present.
Okay, so I like that video. It's a bummer that, people end up with these cancers and different things, and but there's a lot of information that was in that video that maybe you didn't catch. First of all, that all cancer is genetic. Not necessarily that it's passed down, but it is housed in your genes. It has to do with mutations and so forth, and that's what starts cancer, is typically mutations. Now, mutations aren't always bad. As you'll read in your unit, sometimes we need mutations. We need to keep certain things, a little bit different, so that we're all not the exact same, and so that, if something were to come over us, that we wouldn't all just die off, because we do have some mutations. But all that to say, if you do have a mutation and you're a carrier for something, you have that other chromosome, but did you notice all of the environmental things that can do us harm? Those are some of the things that can cause cancer as well, and can cause our chromosomes to become mutated, so to speak, okay? So I thought that was a good video, just to show you guys some other things, and we'll talk about that more in class as well. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about, and again, we're going to discuss this when we come together, but is selective breeding. So selective breeding is, basically when you have these 2 genes, but you basically pick one over the other. So take, for instance, when we have, fruits, vegetables, and, produce and meats and stuff like that, and we like the characteristics that one fruit or vegetable has over another, or this cow or this chicken. So therefore, people are selectively breeding, certain things. So I wish that I had this, but I had this huge grape. It was like a mutant grape. I guarantee there's selective breeding in there. So that's like, oh, yay, more grape for their money, so to speak. But that's not always the case. So I have one more video for you guys. This is about genetic modification.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on this farm he had a cow, E-I-E-I-O. With a moo here and a moo there, here a moo there, everywhere a moo, moo, chick, chick here and a chick, chick there, here a chick, there a chick, everywhere a chick, chick. MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on this farm he had some ducks, E-I-E-I-O. With a quack, quack here and a quack, quack there. Here a quack, there a quack, everywhere a quack, quack. Moo, moo here and a moo, moo there. Here a moo, there a moo, everywhere a moo, moo.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there because, for sake of time, but the fact that I don't have a very good opinion about just selective breeding and all of that stuff, but we'll talk about more of that in just a little bit.